How important is it for you to listen to everyday Americans when it comes to policy making on a
These
daily
people
basis?
built the country, not the complainers. The complainers didn't build the country. Guys like me, they built the country. I watch all these ingrates. They're always complaining. They didn't build anything. They couldn't build anything.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. That's it. That's the entire Trumpist philosophy right there. It's people like him who built the country, people who didn't complain. First of all, there's never been a bigger whiner in American public life than Donald Trump. But more importantly, it was our forebears who complained, if you will, who saw that America could do better, could be better. They're the ones who compelled us to realize the unfinished promise of America. As for the work itself, I suppose billionaires might claim some of the credit, but the work itself came from workers. The labor movement did far more to build America than people like Donald Trump, especially when you acknowledge that what defines America isn't our fiscal economy, our skyscrapers, but our social economy, our ideals. The American middle class, the American dream itself, was built by the American labor movement. And it did that over the fierce and often violent opposition of the billionaire class. Now we face another inflection point in our history. The greatest strides we have ever made, emancipation, the New Deal, they all emerged from moments of deep national trauma. We are in the midst of another such trauma, this one inflicted by our current president and his enablers. But my hope, and this I would argue is part of being American, is that we can turn this Trumpian horror show into lasting change on the scale of the New Deal. We're going to see come November a wholesale rejection of Trumpism by an overwhelming majority of Americans. And in 2028, we will complete that route. But we'd better do something big with the opportunities that will present. I spoke with Mechele Dickerson about this. She's a Harvard-trained bankruptcy law professor at UT Austin and one of the country's foremost experts on financial inequality and the erosion of the American middle class. Her book, The Middle Class New Deal, hit the New York Times bestseller list, and she believes this moment of national crisis is also an opening for the kind of systemic New Deal scale transformation that could fundamentally reorder the economic life of this country. Here's me and Professor Mechele Dickerson. Mechele, thanks so much for joining the show. I got to ask how you conceived of this book at a time when, like, pessimism is it's the air we breathe. The idea that we can do anything grand as a country, much less a society. Nobody's talking about that. We're just talking about democratic survival at this point. How do you write a book about renewal, about a new deal for the middle class when we're fighting to save the democracy itself?
Well, one benefit that I have is I've been working on this book for forever. Now, there wasn't much optimism even a decade ago when I started working on the book, but it is interesting because I had to radically sort of change the focus of the book. It used to have a different name called The Neglected Middle Class. And then I realized that was too backwards thinking. And I did want to be optimistic. So I changed the name and changed the publisher, and it's now the Middle Class New Deal. But when I think about what's happening to sort of the financial stability of the middle class, it probably has some parallels to what we've been seeing in on the political scene for the last decade as well.
In just the last few months, I am registering notes of optimism from the political class. And I'm talking about the politicians we get here on the show, and that's mostly who we talk to, who are suggesting that, look, we have to get through this period, and lots of people are suffering really terribly. But when you look at what we were able to achieve after the Great Depression, with that as sort of the forcing function, there might be a moment here for a wholesale reinvention of how politics operates in Washington. Yeah. Can we really reinvent something like DHS? Can we use this moment of crisis as a moment of opportunity? Do you see it the same way, especially given the fact that you've been thinking about this for 10 years? Might we be at a realignment moment in politics or a sea change moment in society where we could do big things?
I think we can. And whether we say it's a sea change, that's the positive spin, or we're at the breaking point or the tipping point, which is sort of a darker edge. I think that there are lots of people now who may not have agreed on anything, 10 years ago, that realize something's got to give. So I'll look at it on the financial side, since that's where I spend most of my time. When I first started talking about the middle class and the things that I saw that were going on in their lives financially, people would be, well, it's not that bad. Or even if you think a couple of years ago when it started to percolate, and if I hear one more person talk about, the price of eggs or what they found out from somebody in a diner, because it's for the middle class, and I would say for our politics as well, it's not that it's one thing that's wrong, it's everything. And so, okay, maybe the price of eggs goes down, or maybe the price of gas goes up a little bit, but it doesn't change that we have fundamental problems with the way people's lives are financially. And I would suggest the same thing is true. We have fundamental problems with the way that politics is being handled, or I guess at the federal level, one might say not being handled these days. So I agree. And I've noticed when I've been talking about the books in different groups, because I talk to big groups, small groups, TV, podcasts, Lyft drivers. I pity the person that picks me up in a Lyft, because I'm going to start somehow, talking about how they are, both financially and just sort of how you're feeling. And I've noticed that there are more people now that are, sort of uniting and say, we got to fix this.
Yeah. Can you anchor us briefly in what we mean by the American middle class? Because it is something that we have taken for granted for generations, but it wasn't an accident. It was created. Not every country has a middle class. And just as the American government through policy created a middle class, by neglect, the middle class could disappear, as seems to be happening.
Yeah, we've watched the middle class disappear sort of drip by drip, cut by cut, since the 1980s. But the political leaders came together after the World War, after the New Deal and the World War, and they decided we've got all of these men. I mean, there were also women returning from service, but it was mostly men. We have these men coming back from the war, and I'd like to think that our political leaders said we want to do something to thank them for their service. But whether it was out of the goodness of their heart or the stark reality that we don't want to go back to another depression, they said, we're going to fix this. We're going to make it easier for them to buy homes and stay in those homes. So we now have 15 to 30-year mortgages that, for example, my kids probably would not have imagined that there was a time when you couldn't find an affordable mortgage product. We made it easy for people to go back to school. But it wasn't just you have to go, get a 4-year degree from an Ivy League college. It was, do you want, a 9-month certificate so that you can become a plumber or do HVAC work? Do you want to go to a community college for a couple of years because you want to work in the healthcare profession, but not as a doctor, but you want to, be in the caring industry, in the caring profession. And so they made that possible. I also, in the book, and I also like to remind people when I'm talking about what is possible, is I want to take us back to 2020, which none of us want to go back there. We don't want to think about the pandemic. But the thing about it is that they did it again. Political leaders can come together and quickly do, sort of make broad changes, do things that were unheard of until the pandemic. They did it to save the country, and they can do it again because we need to have a lot of things change in order to save our country.
Hey everyone, quick break to say thank you. My last trip to Ukraine was made possible by those of you who signed up for my Substack page. There's a free option too, but the paid subs, which help cover my trips, start at just $8 a month, which actually goes a lot farther than you might think given how cheap it is to sleep in a trench. I'll be going back, and I'll also be posting frequent updates from the front until then. And we've got the Meidas Defense Weekly Substack Live on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Check that out, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the Ken Harbaugh Show Substack channel. Your support is what makes all this possible. Back to the show. The New Deal was obviously transformative in so many ways, and I think should be a model going forward. But one of the groups that was specifically left out, especially with your hypothetical framing of thanking these GIs who are coming back were Black Americans, excluded from so many of the advantages and benefits of this New Deal. I'm wondering if that affects the framing and how we think about that as a model going forward. Does that prejudice our ability to look to it for inspiration, because it does have this really insidious streak through it?
Yeah. Well, one terrific thing, and so we will avoid some of the problems because we now have laws that ban a lot of the acts that a lot of the things that the politicians did to make sure that the Black servicemen who returned didn't get the same benefits as the white servicemen that returned. So, the Civil Rights Act and lots of the other, executive orders now make a lot of that impossible. But I will say one of the things that I've noticed sort of on my 10-year or so journey to write this book is that if I talk about the middle class and everything that I say about the middle class, and I don't talk about race, it's a very different conversation than if I say the exact same thing, but I talk about race. And so one of the things, again, maybe I'm being Pollyannish, but one of the things that I've realized is if I say things like, why is it so hard for lower and middle income workers to become and remain middle class? Everyone's head is nodding. The second I bring in the race piece, even though I could say the same thing, why is it so hard for Black Americans in this country who are lower income and middle income to become and remain middle class? The whole conversation is different. So the good news is we have laws that prevent many of the insidious forms of discrimination that made it easy for whites to become homeowners and excluded Blacks from certain neighborhoods because of redlining and other legal forms of discrimination. But the other thing is, and my numbers may be slightly off, but I always say that about 70 to 80% of the people in this country agree on 70 to 80% of all things. And yet we spend all of our times arguing at the fringes about the things that we don't agree with. Right.
Can you talk about some of the other myths that underpin our conception of the American middle class? And I'll tee up one of them, which is the myth of individual responsibility, rugged individualism, this Reagan-esque idea that we succeed or fail based on our own hard work and merits. What are some of the other myths that have constructed the Americans' conception of their own middle class?
Well, actually, I want to stay with that one, but specifically apply it to young adults. Because that's who I spend most of my time with, whether I'm teaching them at law school or I'm very involved with athletics at the University of Texas. So I spend a lot of time with student athletes. And I have a 22, his birthday was today, 23 and a 25-year-old sons. There's this, the reason that they can't get ahead is because they're snowflakes. And the problem is they want to get the perfect job. And my response is always, I want you to think about the job that you got when you graduated from college. If I'm sort of talking to people who are over the age of 55, you didn't have to qualify the job. You didn't have to say, I graduated from college. I started working my first job. Students graduate from college now and they say, well, I have a temporary job, but I'm hoping that it's going to become permanent. Or it's a full-time job, but it's only going to last until the end of the year. But I'm hoping that maybe they're going to extend the job. Or it's a part-time job and I have 32 hours. And so when we look at sort of individual responsibility and you need to pull yourself up, by the bootstrap, first you have to be given a boot, right? And it has to have straps on it. And so there's this notion that the reason that the middle class can't afford to buy a home is because they want some lavish, 5,000 square foot house, as opposed to rules and regulation make it hard to build small homes in a lot of cities. And if there are no small homes, there really aren't going to be any inexpensive homes. And so one of the myths of what's going on now with the middle class is, well, it's your fault as opposed to let's look at the reasons. Let's look at the changes in the labor market. Let's look at the fact that we now allow employers to have a whole fleet of workers that aren't their employees, but they're independent contractors that are working. And I always pick on them, Amazon, the people that we love. They bring these, things to your front porch if you've ordered whatever thing you think you have to have the next day. They show up, they leave it, they take a picture of it, they get back in that van. Most of them are not employed by Amazon. They're working for a delivery service provider. So one of the things when we're looking at the lives of, sort of how people are actually leading their lives, it's not what we think should be the life that you're leading if you're trying to become and remain middle class.
I suspect you saw some of the coverage of the DoorDash grandma who delivered McDonald's to the White House so that Donald Trump could have his afternoon cheeseburger. I would love your take. This is a political show, and we have to touch on this, on how the MAGA faithful are thinking about the policies that are being enacted by the government that they supported, that are pulling the rug out from under them. And then they're throwing these tidbits like no taxes for tips. But if you read between the lines of this DoorDash delivery driver's story, she was grateful for not having to pay taxes on tips because she couldn't afford her husband's cancer treatment. It feels like that's the bigger issue. When you study voters' behavior and the middle class preference for Trump in the past two elections, how is that shifting based on the realities of what this administration is now delivering?
So one of the things, particularly the first term, they promised that they were going to get good jobs. Those good manufacturing jobs are coming back. The jobs did not come back. Second go around for the people that still voted for the current president, same thing. We're going to get these immigrants out of the country. They are taking your good jobs, and we're going to have those good jobs. And the reason that I think a lot of people are interested in what I'm talking about in the book is because the affordability crisis now is undeniable. And so when you try to tell people, no, everything's fine, really, everything is good, and you're having to make a decision about whether you're going to pay for your husband's cancer treatments because you don't have the money to do it, you can't convince, you can lie to people a little bit, and I would suggest that many of the voters that supported the president were lied to, but you can't lie to them when they're looking at gas prices going up and up and up. And again, I don't want to look at one thing, eggs are up, eggs are down, but the significance of gas prices going up is that affects everything. So if you're a DoorDash driver, Lyft, Uber driver, and we have a lot of people that are working in the gig economy, the gas really affects your bottom line. If you are in really any profession, because you have to get to work every day. And so people that drive to work, if you don't live in a city that has good mass transit, you notice that. People, even if you want to go on a vacation, not anything lavish, you just want to, visit your parents or go visit your kids and get on a plane, you're seeing the cost of airfare skyrocket. So I think a big difference now is, and we actually saw this with COVID, right? When you shut down an entire nation because of the way the pandemic was handled in the early stages, it's hard to convince people, oh no, everything is fine, because they're looking around, trapped in their homes, their friends or family are sick or dying. You can't convince them that, oh no, there's no there when they are living and experiencing the pain and anguish of affordability, or in 2020, the pain and anguish of COVID.
What should we be hoping for if the Congress flips in 2026, if you have this wave of new representatives who feel this urgency, who see this as a moment to capitalize on? Is this the kind of thing we can do piecemeal with a little legislation here, a little legislation there, more tax credits for the middle class? Or do you think there is a need for some wholesale systemic change on the level of the New Deal?
It has to be wholesale. It has to be systemic, not just at the federal level, though. So one of the things that I always like to emphasize is it has to be at the local, state, and the federal level. So Congress can do a lot of things with respect to who we choose to tax, who gets credits, who gets deductions. But at the state level and at the local level, that's where decisions about, for example, higher education, those decisions are made at the state level. Decisions about how zoning what types of zoning laws and regulations will be in a city, that's at the local level. But it has to be comprehensive.
And that's for housing.
Exactly. Zoning
the
law.
issue there is housing is
Exactly.
the crux.
Yeah. So for the things that I identify sort of the markers of the middle class in the book, it's K-12 education. Well, that's at the local or the state level. College at the state level. Jobs, all three levels. How we allow employers to, as I just said, treat people that should be characterized as employees, as workers at state and federal level. But it has to be comprehensive. And I think one of the reasons I am optimistic, not just because there may be a new wave of political leaders at all three levels, but also because they seem to be listening this time. And I think they may understand that this is actually a winning issue. Whether you're on the left, the right, centrist, this is something that they can rally around, and they will galvanize their voters if they can come up with concrete reasons to vote for me because I'm going to make your life better financially. Not the pie in the sky. Well, we want to, make sure that you feel good. Feeling good is great. Being able to pay your bills is better.
Could not agree more. I am hopeful as you are. I guess the first test will be November in 2026, and we have many more challenges after that. Mechele, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.